They called her a monster. The scarred waitress at Mel's Diner, Sarah Miller, hid beneath long sleeves every day, enduring cruel whispers about her disfigured hands from customers who saw only ugliness, where something else lay hidden. For 3 years, she had kept her secret, pouring coffee while people mocked her appearance and threw tips on the floor like she was beneath them. But today, when a construction worker's violent shove sends her stumbling, her carefully maintained facade crumbles, her sleeve riding up to reveal a military tattoo that makes a quiet customer in the corner booth, Michael Kelly, freeze in shock, his sudden recognition poised to shatter every assumption in that diner. Michael Kelly sat hunched over in the corner booth, the same booth he had claimed 2 hours ago when the morning rush had barely begun and the coffee had still been fresh, his weathered hands wrapped around his third cup of black coffee that had long since gone cold while he wrestled with 18 years of searching and doubt. The photograph in his jacket pocket seemed to burn against his chest like a live coal, a faded image of a younger version of himself in desert camouflage alongside fellow soldiers from the 3rd Infantry Division, their faces bright with the invincibility of youth before that night in July 2006 changed everything in ways that still haunted his dreams. He studied the waitress moving with unmistakable military precision between tables, her movements efficient and controlled, always keeping her left side slightly turned away from customers, always wearing long sleeves despite the diner's oppressive warmth that had other patrons fanning themselves with menus. The way she moved, held herself, and automatically scanned the room every few minutes as if checking for threats screamed military training to someone who knew what to look for, but it was more than that, something specific about her bearing that had made him extend his stay from a planned quick breakfast to this marathon observation session. It has to be her, he whispered to himself for what must have been the 20th time, his voice barely audible over the ancient air conditioner's death rattle and the sizzle of bacon from the kitchen. After 18 years of searching every VA hospital, every veterans gathering, every online forum and database, it just has to be her standing right here in this nowhere diner. But doubt gnawed at him with sharp teeth because how could he be certain when the last time he had seen her face, it had been illumined by flames and covered in blood, her voice the last thing he had heard before darkness claimed him in that burning Humvee. The memories came in fragments like shrapnel, the deafening blast of the IED, the immediate fire that had turned their vehicle into a death trap, the door that wouldn't open no matter how hard he pulled, and then her face appearing through the smoke like an avenging angel who had chosen his life over her own safety. He remembered her hands, steady despite the chaos, pulling him through the window that seemed impossibly small, the way she had gone back for Thompson even as the ammunition began cooking off from the heat, and most of all, the moment when the second IED detonated, and she had thrown her body over his without hesitation. The bell above the door chimed violently, shattering his reverie as Chad Morrison and his construction crew shouldered their way into the diner with the kind of aggressive confidence that immediately shifted the atmosphere from quiet morning calm to something charged and unpleasant, like the static electricity before a thunderstorm. Chad, standing 6'2" of entitled arrogance wrapped in a Branson construction shirt that stretched tight across muscles built more in the gym than on actual job sites, scanned the room like a predator seeking the weakest prey, his gaze settling on Sarah as she approached their table, notepad in hand, his lips curling into a smirk that his companions recognized all too well as the expression that preceded his particular brand of cruelty disguised as humor. Behind him, his 2 crew members followed like hyenas trailing a lion, already chuckling in anticipation of whatever verbal abuse their leader was about to dish out, because this was their morning entertainment, their way of feeling superior to someone else before heading to a job where they were just anonymous laborers. Well, boys, looks like we got ourselves a mystery here, Chad announced loudly enough for half the diner to hear, his voice carrying that particular tone of false joviality that bullies perfected when they wanted their audience to know something cruel was coming. Hey, waitress, why don't you dress a little cooler? This place is hot as hell, and you're wrapped up like it's winter in Alaska. What are you hiding under all that fabric? Something ugly? Scars from a meth lab explosion, track marks you don't want the health inspector to see? His crew chuckled obediently, the sound harsh and grating in the morning stillness, while other patrons suddenly found their coffee cups and newspapers fascinating, that particular brand of cowardice that allowed evil to flourish because good people chose comfort over confrontation. Sarah approached their table with measured steps, her expression a mask of professional neutrality perfected through years of similar encounters, though Michael noticed the slight tension in her shoulders, the way her left hand stayed carefully positioned behind the order pad. The morning sun slanted through the diner's grimy windows, casting long shadows that seemed to divide the room into territories, the bright spaces where normal life continued and the darker corners where old traumas lurked, waiting for moments like this to resurface. Sarah's expression remained neutral, a mask perfected through years of practice dealing with difficult customers, but also something deeper, the kind of composure that came from facing true horror and surviving it. "Good morning, gentlemen. What can I get started for you today?" Her voice carried no emotion, no reaction to the insult, which only seemed to encourage Chad further, like a shark sensing blood in the water but not realizing it was swimming toward its own doom. The very lack of reaction seemed to infuriate him, as if her refusal to be baited was a personal insult to his authority, and his face darkened with the particular rage of small men who needed others to feel small. From his corner booth, Michael watched the scene unfold with growing tension, his hands unconsciously clenching into fists that bore their own scars from a different time and place, knuckles white with the effort of restraining himself from immediate intervention. Something about the waitress's bearing, the way she held herself despite the verbal assault, spoke to him of deeper strength, of someone who had faced far worse than the petty cruelties of small men and survived things that would break most people. The photograph in his pocket seemed to grow heavier as he studied her profile, searching for confirmation in the angle of her jaw, the set of her shoulders, the way she tucked a strand of dark hair behind her ear with her right hand while keeping the left carefully positioned behind the order pad, all movements choreographed to hide something while maintaining the facade of normalcy. His mind raced through comparisons, overlaying his memories of that night with the woman standing before him, trying to reconcile the blood-covered hero of his memories with this quiet waitress who served coffee to people who didn't deserve to breathe the same air as her. Chad leaned back in his seat, making a show of looking her up and down with theatrical disgust that would have been comical if it weren't so genuinely cruel. "Maybe start by explaining why you're dressed for winter in the middle of summer, hiding burn marks, some kitchen accident when you were too stupid to watch the fryer. Or maybe you're just one of those cutters who can't handle real life without taking it out on yourself." The words hung in the air like poison while his companions shifted uncomfortably, their laughter becoming forced and nervous as even they sensed he was crossing lines that shouldn't be crossed. An elderly couple 2 tables over exchanged worried glances, the husband's jaw tightening as if preparing to speak, his hand reaching for the cane beside his chair, but his wife's gentle touch on his arm kept him silent with a whispered, "Don't make trouble, Harold. It's not our business," even as her eyes reflected the shame of choosing safety over righteousness. The tension in the diner had become almost palpable, like the oppressive heat before a thunderstorm, with every patron acutely aware of the drama unfolding but caught in that peculiar paralysis of bystanders who wanted to help but feared becoming targets themselves. Even the cook had stopped his usual clatter in the kitchen, peering through the service window with a frown creasing his weathered face, his hand tightening on the spatula as if considering whether to intervene. It was one of those moments that revealed character, that showed who people really were when faced with the choice between comfort and courage, and most were failing the test as they had failed so many times before. The very air seemed to thicken with unspoken shame and building tension, creating an atmosphere where something had to give, where the pressure would either dissipate or explode, and everyone seemed to be holding their breath, waiting to see which way the morning would break. Chad's cruelty escalated with each passing moment, feeding off the silence of the diner like a parasite, drawing strength from its host's weakness. "You know what I think happened," he mused loudly, addressing his audience of uncomfortable diners more than Sarah herself. "I bet she got those scars from a meth lab explosion. That's what happens in these small towns, right? Bunch of trailer trash cooking up drugs until boom." He made an explosive gesture with his hands, causing Sarah to step back involuntarily, a movement so slight that only someone watching as intently as Michael would have noticed. Or maybe it was a house fire caused by passing out drunk with a cigarette. That's why she's working in this dump. Nowhere else would hire someone who looks like Freddy Krueger's sister. The reference drew nervous laughter from one of his crew members, though the other had begun to look genuinely uncomfortable, his eyes darting between Chad and the other patrons who sat frozen in their seats. Sarah's internal struggle played out in micro-expressions that most would miss: the tightening around her eyes, the way her breathing shifted from steady to carefully controlled, the slight tremor in her left hand that she tried to hide by gripping the order pad tighter. For just a moment, the diner faded away, and she was back there, the taste of sand and blood in her mouth, the weight of gear on her shoulders, the screams of wounded soldiers cutting through the night air. But she had learned long ago how to push those memories down, to lock them away in a box marked "Do Not Open," and continue functioning in a world that neither understood nor particularly cared about what she'd seen and done. The breakfast rush at Mel's diner required a different kind of courage than combat, the courage to smile and serve coffee to people who saw her scars and made assumptions, who whispered behind their hands and stared when they thought she wasn't looking. Chad reached into his wallet with theatrical flair, pulling out 2 wrinkled dollar bills and tossing them onto the floor at Sarah's feet. "There's your tip, sweetheart. Pick it up. Maybe save up for some scar cream, though I doubt they make anything strong enough for whatever horror show you're hiding." The bills fluttered to the grimy linoleum like dead leaves, and the entire diner seemed to hold its breath as Sarah looked down at them. The elderly man at table 3 had half risen from his seat, his face flushed with indignation, but his wife's urgent whisper of, "Harold, please don't make trouble," kept him from fully standing. The cook in the kitchen had emerged from behind the service window, his massive frame filling the doorway, but he too hesitated, caught between his protective instincts and the knowledge that confronting customers rarely ended well for employees. Sarah bent down slowly to retrieve the bills, her movements careful and controlled, each action deliberate and measured. It was as she straightened that Chad made his fatal error, the moment that would change everything in ways none of them could have anticipated. Whether from malice or simple carelessness, his hand shot out as she rose, shoving her shoulder hard enough to send her stumbling sideways, the violent motion causing her uniform shirt to pull loose from her waist and her sleeve to ride up past her elbow. But it wasn't just the scars that were revealed in that moment of calculated cruelty, it was something else entirely, something that made Michael Kelly's blood run cold and then hot in rapid succession. The tattoo stood out starkly against her scarred skin, military crisp and undeniably authentic, 3rd Infantry Division, Ramadi 2006, wrapped around an image of crossed rifles and the division's distinctive insignia. The scars themselves told their own story, a horrific narrative written in damaged flesh that spoke of extreme heat and violence, tissue that had been burned and healed in ways that suggested not accident but sacrifice. The entire diner could see it now, this glimpse into a hidden history that transformed their perception in an instant. One of the younger customers, a college student home for summer break, whispered, "Holy, that's a military tattoo," loud enough for everyone to hear, the atmosphere shifting palpably, like the air pressure dropping before a storm as understanding began to dawn on some, while others remained locked in confusion. Chad, however, remained oblivious to the changing mood, too drunk on his own perceived power to notice the way Michael had risen from his booth or how other patrons were now looking at Sarah with something approaching or rather than pity or disgust. "Oh, this is rich," he laughed, pointing at the exposed tattoo. "Look at this, boys. She's playing soldier now. What did you do? Buy that fake tattoo online? Trying to get sympathy by pretending to be a veteran?" His laughter was harsh and grating, echoing off the diner's walls like breaking glass. "I've seen this before. These stolen valor types who buy military gear at surplus stores and pretend they served. Pathetic. As if anyone would believe someone like you actually served our country. You probably can't even spell Afghanistan, let alone claim you were there." Sarah stood frozen, her shirt still disheveled, the tattoo and scars fully visible now under the harsh fluorescent lights, her face gone pale beneath her carefully maintained composure, and for the first time since the confrontation began, real emotion flickered across her features, not hurt or anger at Chad's words, but something deeper and more complex, the look of someone whose most private pain had been forcibly exposed, whose carefully constructed walls had been breached by casual cruelty. Her hand moved unconsciously to pull down her sleeve but stopped midway, as if she realized the futility of trying to hide what had already been seen. The silence in the diner had become complete, even the coffee machine's usual gurgle seeming to pause in respect for the moment's gravity. Michael Kelly had crossed half the distance to their table before he even realized he was moving, his chair clattering to the floor behind him in his haste, his eyes fixed on that tattoo with an intensity that bordered on religious revelation, his mind racing through memories and possibilities with the speed of automatic weapons fire. Every detail he could see confirmed what his heart had been telling him for the past 2 hours, the way she moved, the careful control, the specific design of that unit insignia that couldn't be faked because he'd worn the same one. His hands shook as he reached into his jacket pocket, fingertips brushing against the photograph he'd carried for 18 years, like a talisman against forgetting. The moment crystallized around him, past and present colliding with the force of an IED explosion, and suddenly he could smell cordite and burning fuel mixed with the mundane scents of coffee and bacon grease. Michael's approach was that of a man walking through a dream, each step careful and deliberate, as if the floor might give way beneath him at any moment, his eyes remaining locked on the tattoo, on the familiar insignia that had marked his own skin once upon a time before shrapnel and surgeries had erased it, along with so much else. The coffee cup in his hand clattered against a table as he passed, the sound sharp in the preternatural quiet that had descended over Mel's diner. "3rd Infantry," he said, his voice barely above a whisper but carrying clearly in the silence, his voice cracking on the words as years of searching and wondering condensed into this single moment of recognition. "No, it can't be. After all this time, it just can't be." He stopped 3 feet from Sarah, close enough to see the way her eyes had gone wide with something between fear and recognition, far enough to give her space to run if she chose to. The examination on Michael's face was intense and methodical, the kind of scrutiny that came from years of assessing threats and allies in split-second decisions, his gaze traveling from the tattoo to her face, searching for familiarity in features that time and trauma had altered but not erased entirely. "Could you be?" The question hung between them like a bridge across 18 years of separation. Ramadi. Summer of 2006. Each word was carefully chosen, a password to a shared experience that only 2 people in that diner could fully understand. Sarah's reaction was immediate and visceral, her body tensing as if preparing for impact, her eyes darting to the exits like a trapped animal seeking escape routes, but there was something else there too, a flicker of recognition that she couldn't quite hide despite years of practice at concealing her emotions. "Oh my God," Michael breathed, and now his voice carried the weight of certainty, of puzzle pieces clicking into place with audible finality. "Sergeant Miller. Sarah Miller." The names fell from his lips like a prayer answered after years of doubt, his hands moving unconsciously to his chest, fingers tracing the outline of scars hidden beneath his shirt, scars that matched hers in their origin, if not their severity. "You're the one. You're the one who pulled me out of that burning Humvee." The statement wasn't a question but a declaration, a truth so profound that it seemed to alter the very air in the diner. "I've been sitting here for 2 hours because I thought I was seeing ghosts. I've been carrying your picture for 18 years, searching every VA hospital, every veterans gathering, every online forum, and here you are serving coffee in a diner in the middle of nowhere." Sarah's carefully maintained composure finally cracked, the tray in her hands crashing to the floor with a sound like artillery in the quiet space, cups shattering, silverware scattering, and coffee spreading across the linoleum in a dark pool that nobody moved to clean. She stumbled backward, her hand reaching for the counter to steady herself as her legs threatened to give way. "No," she whispered, shaking her head in denial of what her eyes were telling her. "You're supposed to be. They told me you didn't make it. They said the injuries were too severe, that you died in Germany." Her voice broke on the last word, years of guilt and grief pouring through the cracks in her professional facade. "I thought I failed you. All these years I thought I failed to save you." Tears tracked down her cheeks unchecked, each one a testament to nights spent reliving those moments, wondering if she could have done more, moved faster, been better. The revelation rippled through the diner like a shock wave, touching each person differently but affecting all profoundly. Chad's laughter died in his throat, his smirk fading as even his limited intelligence began to grasp that something significant was happening, something that relegated his petty cruelties to the insignificance they deserved. His crew exchanged uncertain glances, their earlier bravado evaporating in the face of genuine emotion and history that dwarfed their small-minded games. The elderly couple at table 3 clutched each other's hands, the woman's eyes bright with unshed tears as she whispered something about their own son who had served. The college student had lowered his phone, the urge to record seemingly forgotten in the face of something too profound for social media. Even the cook had emerged fully from the kitchen, his bulk filling the doorway as he watched the scene unfold with the attention of someone witnessing history. Alive, Michael confirmed, his voice stronger now, filled with the kind of emotion that comes from gratitude so deep it has no adequate expression. Because of you, you ran into hell itself to pull me out. When everyone else was running away from the fire, you ran toward it. He took a step closer, his movements careful and non-threatening, aware that he was approaching someone who had been living with invisible wounds for nearly 2 decades. They told me a female soldier saved my life, but in the chaos afterward, I lost track. They shipped me to Germany, then Walter Reed. Months of surgeries and recovery. By the time I could ask questions, you were gone. They said you'd been discharged, disappeared into civilian life. His hand went to his pocket, pulling out the photograph with reverent care. This is all I had. This picture from before that night and the memory of someone refusing to leave me behind. Sarah's gaze fixed on the photograph, her breath catching as she recognized faces from another lifetime, young soldiers grinning at the camera with the confidence of those who hadn't yet learned the true cost of war. Her finger traced the air above one face in particular, a young man whose features bore enough resemblance to the one standing before her to confirm what her heart already knew. Rodriguez didn't make it, she said quietly, naming another face in the photo. Neither did Thompson. I tried. God, I tried to get everyone out, but the second IED. Her voice cracked, unable to finish the sentence that had haunted her dreams for 18 years, the weight of survivor's guilt evident in every line of her body, the burden of being the one who lived when others didn't, the curse of memory that never faded, no matter how many coffee cups she filled or tables she cleaned. The atmosphere in the diner had transformed completely, the very air seeming to thicken with the weight of shared history and unspoken sacrifice, customers who had entered seeking nothing more than breakfast and coffee finding themselves witnesses to something far more profound, a reunion that spoke to the bonds forged in combat, the debts that could never be repaid, and the healing that sometimes comes from simply knowing that your sacrifice mattered. The morning sun streaming through the windows seemed to spotlight the 2 veterans, casting long shadows that stretched across the floor like bridges between past and present. In that moment, Mel's Diner had become something more than a roadside restaurant. It had become a place where hidden heroism was revealed and where the true cost of freedom was written in scars both visible and invisible. Chad Morrison's face had undergone a transformation from smug superiority to confusion and then to something approaching desperation as he sensed the shift in the room's dynamics, like a predator suddenly realizing it had wandered into the territory of something far more dangerous than itself. Unable to accept that his position as the morning's entertainment director had been usurped by something genuine and profound, he doubled down on his cruelty with the blind persistence of a man who had never learned when to retreat, who had been raised to believe that backing down was weakness and kindness was for losers. His voice took on a weaseling quality that made him sound even more pathetic than before, like a playground bully suddenly confronted by adults who weren't impressed by his posturing. "Oh, come on," he scoffed, gesturing wildly at the scene before him, as if he could wave away the emotion like smoke. "Don't fall for this act. She probably just peeled potatoes in some military kitchen if she served at all. Look at her." He pointed at Sarah with a shaking finger, his movements becoming more agitated as he felt his audience slipping away from his control. "She's no hero, just a scarred-up nobody trying to get sympathy with a fake story about Iraq and burning vehicles and whatever else she's selling." The words tumbled out faster now, as if volume and speed could somehow restore his dominance over the situation he had so thoroughly misjudged, each sentence digging him deeper into a hole he didn't even realize he was creating for himself. "I've seen this con before. People buying military surplus gear at Goodwill and pretending they're heroes to get free meals and discounts. Stolen valor is what they call it, and it's disgusting. It's an insult to real veterans who actually served, not like this waitress who probably got those scars from a grease fire or a domestic situation gone wrong. He turned to his crew for support but found them edging away, their faces showing the dawning recognition that their leader had crossed lines that couldn't be uncrossed, said things that couldn't be unsaid. The effect of Chad's words was immediate but not what he had intended, like throwing gasoline on a fire he thought was dying, only to watch it explode into an inferno that would consume him. Where before there had been uncomfortable silence in the face of his bullying, now there was a palpable anger building among the diner's patrons, the kind of collective rage that came from witnessing someone attack what they had just learned was sacred. The elderly man at table 3 was fully on his feet now, his wife no longer restraining him, his weathered face set in lines of disgust that spoke of someone who had seen real valor and recognized its opposite when confronted with it. "You ignorant little shit," he said, his voice shaking not with age but with fury. "I served in Vietnam, and I know a real soldier when I see one. Sit down and shut your mouth before you make this worse for yourself." But Chad was beyond reasoning, beyond the ability to read the room or recognize the danger he was in, trapped in his own narrative of superiority that was crumbling around him like a sandcastle before a tsunami. It was Michael Kelly's reaction that would prove most devastating, his face cycling through emotions from disbelief to rage to something colder and more controlled, the expression of a soldier who had learned to channel anger into purposeful action, who had been trained to use words as weapons when violence wasn't an option. He turned away from Sarah slowly, deliberately, each movement calculated to draw attention and hold it, transforming himself from desperate searcher to avenging angel in the space between heartbeats. "Peel potatoes," the words exploded through the diner with the force of a battlefield command, causing several people to flinch involuntarily, coffee cups rattling on tables from the sheer power of his voice. "You dare to stand there in your comfortable life with your intact body and your ignorant assumptions and question her service. You want to know who she is? You want to know about the woman you've been mocking and humiliating for the sin of bearing scars that tell a story your small mind couldn't begin to comprehend?" Michael paused, letting the questions hang in the air with the weight of incoming artillery, his eyes scanning the assembled crowd to ensure he had their complete attention before he began the demolition of Chad Morrison that would be talked about in this town for years to come. July 15, 2006. Ramadi, Iraq, 120 degrees in the shade, except there was no shade in that hellhole. Just sun and sand and death waiting around every corner. His voice dropped lower, forcing everyone to lean in to hear, a storyteller's trick that commanded absolute attention while building tension like a tightening spring. Our convoy was returning from patrol. Routine, we thought, the kind of mission we'd done 100 times before. 3 Humvees, 12 soldiers, everyone tired and thinking about getting back to base for what passed for dinner in that place. Then the world exploded. He paused again, his eyes distant now, seeing not the diner but a dusty road half a world away, reliving moments that had been seared into his memory with the kind of clarity that only trauma provides. The IED hit the lead vehicle, my vehicle, with enough force to flip a 9,000-pound armored Humvee like it was a toy. Rodriguez was driving. Michael's voice caught on the name, humanizing the statistics of war. Good kid from El Paso, 22 years old, had a girlfriend back home he was going to propose to when we got back. The blast killed him instantly. At least that's what we told ourselves, because the alternative, that he suffered in those flames, was unbearable to consider. Thompson was unconscious, bleeding from a head wound that looked survivable if we could just get him help fast enough. And me, his hand went unconsciously to his chest again, fingers tracing scars through his shirt. I was trapped. The blast had twisted the door frame like a pretzel, jamming it shut, and fire was already spreading from the ruptured fuel tank, eating its way through the vehicle's interior like a living thing hungry for human flesh. He asked, directing the question at Chad but speaking to everyone, "Have you ever seen a vehicle burn from the inside? Have you ever felt your skin beginning to blister while you're still conscious, still aware that you're about to burn alive, still able to smell your own flesh cooking? Have you ever known with absolute certainty that you're going to die badly and there's nothing you can do about it except scream and pray for it to be quick?" The questions weren't rhetorical, they were weapons aimed at Chad's conscience, assuming he had one, designed to shatter his comfortable ignorance with the brutal reality of what he had mocked. That's when she appeared. Sergeant Sarah Miller, our unit's medic, who was supposed to stay back with the wounded from the other vehicles but who never could follow that particular order when her people were in danger. Michael's voice had taken on a rhythmic quality, like a prayer or a battle hymn, each word carefully chosen to build the narrative toward its inevitable climax, weaving a story that transformed Sarah from anonymous waitress to mythic hero before their eyes. She ran into those flames. No hesitation, no consideration for her own safety, no thought except that one of her soldiers needed help. She had nothing but her bare hands and combat knife to break through the window, her medical supplies useless against the immediate threat of fire, just determination that I've never seen matched before or since in all my years of service. He looked directly at Chad now, his gaze piercing through the man's bravado like a laser through paper. She pulled me out first, dragging 200 pounds of soldier and gear through a window that seemed impossibly small, the flames licking at her uniform, her exposed skin already blistering from the heat. But she didn't stop. She went back for Thompson, even though anyone with functioning eyes could see the fire had spread too far, even though the ammunition was starting to cook off from the heat, sending rounds in every direction like deadly fireworks. Michael's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, forcing the absolute silence in the diner to deepen as everyone strained to hear. That's when the second IED detonated. Command later said it was positioned specifically to catch first responders, a tactic the insurgents had perfected to maximize casualties among medics and rescue personnel. Sarah saw it coming, that split second of recognition that comes from experience and training. And instead of diving for cover like any sane person would do, she threw her body over mine. He had to stop, swallowing hard against the emotion that threatened to overwhelm him even after 18 years. The blast should have killed us both instantly. Would have if she hadn't made herself a human shield, taking the shrapnel and debris and superheated gases into her own body to protect mine. By the time the quick reaction force arrived, she was unconscious, her back and arms a mess of burns and embedded metal that looked like something from a horror movie. Except this horror was real, and it was chosen, and it was heroic beyond anything Hollywood could imagine. The silence in the diner had become a living thing, broken only by the soft sound of someone crying, perhaps the elderly woman, perhaps Sarah herself, or maybe multiple people touched by the story of sacrifice laid bare before them. Michael wasn't finished, though. He had 18 years of searching and gratitude to express, and Chad Morrison had provided the perfect opportunity to do so in a way that would leave no doubt about who deserved respect and who deserved contempt. 17, he said, the number hanging in the air like a verdict. That's the number you need to understand. 17 soldiers are breathing today, seeing their families, living their lives because Sarah Miller repeatedly chose others' lives over her own safety. 17 families didn't get folded flags and carefully worded condolence letters because she wouldn't leave anyone behind, even when doctrine said to preserve medical personnel for future casualties. Bronze Star for Valor, Purple Heart for wounds received in combat, Combat Medical Badge with star denoting participation in ground combat, Meritorious Service Medal. And what did she ask for in return? Nothing. What recognition did she seek? None. She disappeared into civilian life, carrying those scars inside and out, working in this diner, serving coffee to people who called her monster, who mocked her appearance, who threw money on the floor like she was beneath their contempt. He was moving now, pacing like a caged predator, his anger building with each word until it filled the diner like a physical presence. And you, Chad Morrison of Branson Construction, you dare to call her Freddy Krueger, you dare to question her service? You throw $2 on the floor and tell her to buy scar cream for wounds she received saving lives that you aren't worthy to polish the boots of. The digital age had arrived in Mel's diner with a vengeance while Michael spoke, smartphones appearing like weapons drawn in defense of honor, their cameras capturing every word of his testimony and Chad's increasingly pale face as he realized the magnitude of his error. "This is going viral," someone shouted from the back, their voice filled with the excitement of witnessing justice in real time. 89,000 watching on my stream right now. It's spreading across platforms like wildfire, another voice chimed in, closer to Chad and impossible to ignore. "That's Branson Construction on his shirt. I just tagged their whole leadership team, their corporate account." The interconnected world had made the diner's walls transparent, transforming a local incident into a globally witnessed moment of reckoning that would follow Chad Morrison for the rest of his life. Chad's phone began buzzing insistently, the screen lighting up with notification after notification in a cascade of digital doom, his face, already pale from Michael's words, going ashen as he glimpsed the caller ID showing his boss's name, then his supervisor, then numbers he didn't recognize that were probably reporters or angry citizens who had found his information online. The phone continued to ring, joined by text message alerts and social media notifications in a symphony of impending consequence that grew louder with each passing second. "My boss," he whispered, the words barely audible over the electronic noise. "Oh God, my boss is calling." But the crowd that had formed between him and the exit wasn't interested in his suddenly urgent need to deal with the consequences of his actions, their faces reflecting the collective decision that he would face the music here in front of everyone, in front of her.